Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to an episode with Espresso with Matt. I'm here with my friend Dave, who is an HR leader, business owner, and really kind of a wealth of information. Dave and I have connected over the last few months and had some really great conversations about HR, where it's going, mergers, change, and just the difference in career. We want to really get into this episode. David, thank you so much for joining. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Matt. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you as always. And it's only unfortunate. It's a beautiful day here in New Jersey, so it's unfortunate that we're inside, but it's always good to be with you. So thank you for having me.
I actually turned on the air conditioner today for the first time. I'm one of those people who really has to wait till the air conditioner comes on. I was talking to my wife. I'm like, I'm turning the air conditioner on. I'm hot in here. Yeah, it's beautiful. I have a double header for kids softball tomorrow, which I heard it's going to thunderstorm. So I'm not sure we'll have good weather for tomorrow. But love the end of April, May weather in New Jersey. Doesn't get enough credit for how great weather we have here. But Dave, before we get to anything else, what are you drinking today? What we got in the coffee mug today?
Today it's chock full of nuts, regular, and I drink it black, no sugar. So
A,
I'm a pretty simple guy when it comes to my coffee.
a true Renaissance man. And as you're a Notre Dame alumni, the chock full of nuts, coffee, black, that is a very good old school coffee drink. I gotta tell you, I really like hearing that because the last few episodes we've had everyone drinking tea, water, um, organic coffee. I don't know. Nothing like a good old fashioned cup of black
Yeah,
coffee get the job done. I have my
it's old school.
traditional, double espresso here, go ready to go. So impressed with your background and some of the experience you bring. Can you just tell everyone a little bit about your background, your career history, and a little bit about your journey through different areas in HR?
Absolutely happy to. So, as you said, I'm an HR guy by trade. I've been doing this for a long time. This is actually my second career. I started as a high school teacher, so I spent several years teaching high school English and coaching, made the pivot into HR. I started my career in compensation and HRIS, so sort of technical, developing my technical skills. And I was in an organization that was growing through acquisitions, so I learned how to work with business people on mergers and acquisitions and found that skill to be very valuable. I moved into business partner roles. So I was responsible for HR teams supporting large businesses, and those businesses were transforming. And so we were not only through mergers and acquisitions, but organically needing to develop new skills and new experience. And I think one of the things that makes me think is how uh, people like us who reach a stage in their career where they've seen transformation before, right? We've seen whatever the new trend is, we've seen a version of it in the past very often, and we've worked through that. And so I think there are times when you know we're able to better leverage that experience and do things in a way that we weren't able to the first time we saw it. And so, hopefully, just being able to use our experience. But, after, as I was in that role as business partner, we were growing. Um, the 2008 financial crisis caused the firm to ask me to take my transaction experience and work on divestitures. So I went from bringing new businesses in, new companies in, and trying to develop a culture to trying to carve them out, stand them up, and sell them off, and help work with employees who had just been told that the business they were in was up for sale. What does that mean for them? Help a business leader try to figure out what are the economics of that new business on a standalone basis. What and if we're selling it to someone on a standalone basis. What do they need in terms of a finance function, an HR function, an
Yeah.
IT? And so it was a great experience. Really enjoyed that time. It was unfortunate circumstances, but I had a great leader, several really good leaders I worked with who really had a focus on making sure that the employees were well taken care of, and
So
we're
important.
pretty successful in that regard. Um, and I then pivoted into consulting. So I spent a few years doing HR consulting in a variety of areas, a lot of M&A work, due diligence, integration. Had the opportunity to work with and develop some junior consultants, help build up their skill set, and help them decide if M&A was something they were interested in pursuing. Um, and Since then, I've had a couple of corporate roles back in the corporate side where I was building out HR M&A capabilities for two organizations that were expecting to grow, including one private equity backed company. And Most recently, I have sort of rehung my shingle as an independent contractor or independent consultant, and I have been working with organizations that are going through mergers and acquisitions. And again, everything from due diligence through integration planning and execution.
Yeah. Dave, what a wonderful career, and thank you for me at least for sharing some of your experiences over our call. And I really love that theme we talked a little bit about. In HR or just any organization, you're either growing or you're shrinking, right? And both of those have such unique challenges for HR, and leadership at HR. And I love that idea you talk about experience. So as an organization grows and it's merging and acquiring more business, or the vice versa, the work level for HR is kind of the same. It's a different behavior, but that change management, that constant sense of someone moved my cheese today, right? To go to that famous book. What skills do you bring to that change management as a leader in HR that's important? Because there's so many change even today. It's happening all the time. Whether you're growing, shrinking, you're merging or downsizing, what's important for a leader to understand with change?
Well, I think a couple things, Matt. I think one, change is the constant. Um, and and that change also, if we think about the workplace today, um, work itself really is changing. In some cases, AI is impacting how people do their jobs. In other cases, where they work is being impacted because they were in the office, then they were remote, then they were hybrid. Now they're being asked to come back to the office. Um, so so there are a lot of changes that are occurring constantly, and and I think one of the things that I focus on when I work with leaders is we're not managing the change itself, right? The change is what it is. We're trying to help manage people's experience and reaction to that change and how that change is impacting them. And, one of the things that I think is um, very important in any sort of change is making sure that there's a lot of clear communication with people. And that communication isn't always good news. In fact, a lot of times it's not good news. But, one of the things in my experience is that very often um, clear news, even when it's not welcome news or it's not good news, is better than whatever people fill that void or that silence with.
Oh
Um,
my God,
because they,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that, Matt.
Well, it's such an important point. I mean, I think first of all, that change is constant and going through that. But yeah, I mean, communication is such a key. And I really look at this way. I think about it, it's okay for people to ask this question: how does this impact me? And I think if you're an HR professional leadership, you got to ask and answer that question for the people you're communicating to. You know, you can talk about the organization, the goals, and everything. But at the end of the day, they're sitting there listening. Okay, this means what for me? And you have to be able to explain that. Don't be around the bush and talk about that. And you're right, because in the absence of information, people go to the absolute worst. And there's been time and time again I found when the organizations I work with that lack of communication is so much worse than bad news. You got to get through that door of change. And where you really get stuck in an organization is when you don't move through the change quickly. You know, you are in this constant state of just hypersensitivity of everything's gonna be bad news. You don't get to that next level. Um, you know, it's really interesting. You've seen both sides of that. You've seen growth and mergers and people challenge through that. You've seen, you know, acquisitions being laid off and other things. And the uniqueness of the challenges is the same for both, I think. You know, you mentioned a little bit about the change in work environment. Um, and you know, you and I have talked a lot about that. You know, both of us have kind of, you know, as we termed, hung our shingle as a independent consultant right now, working together on how that what that means and getting that network. But for so many people out there, the job and the ground is kind of shaking and changing around them. Um, we kind of have to reskill and learn new things. What have you specifically had to do to kind of reskill and figure out how to manage this changing environment for work in HR right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Matt. I think back to, when I entered the workforce and we didn't use email, right?
What a
So,
better time that was, right?
if you think of, an environment where you're not using email, where if someone needs to get a hold of you, they need to know your home phone number, and you need to be home um,
Yeah,
when they want to talk to you. Um, and fast forward to being able to access the internet for all sorts of information, to communicate through, um, email, and then cell phones, and eventually smartphones, and
yeah,
so I think we're a bit like the um, we've seen those changes, we've adapted to those changes, and we've made them part of our approach. And I think we'll continue to see that. We're seeing that now with artificial intelligence being introduced, and how do we incorporate those tools not only into our work life, but ultimately probably into our personal life, right?
yeah.
If someone had told you, that your car would be Wi-Fi enabled and you could start the oven, from your car on your way home from work, right? And
Yeah,
you know, so all of the way technology in particular is changing um, the way people work. I also think there's continued tension as we look at what's going on, the technology, and the decisions about remote work during the pandemic really opened up a global workforce in many ways, and it enabled people in certain jobs. Obviously, there are certain jobs that will always need to be done in person, but many jobs are now being could be done anywhere.
yeah,
And then and recently we've seen a move from a lot of organizations to bring people back in person to sort of balance or find what they thought was missing from being remote. But I think we're still going to see a lot of tension, and a need for skilled workers who have the ability to work where they want, when they want,
Yeah.
the ability to work asynchronously, not just remotely. And so I think that the workplace is going to continue to change significantly over the next few years.
It's funny you mentioned, like, let's talk about the cell phones, for example, and the phone numbers. Growing up, I remember my home phone number and all my friends' phone numbers to this day. Now, today, I know one phone number, my wife's phone number. So if I ever was arrested and I was given like that one call to make, if she doesn't pick up the phone, I'm staying in jail for the weekend because I don't know who else to call. I had no other numbers. But I think about that. It's like that's okay. I don't need to remember numbers. I'm doing other things. And I think about those organizations that are doing this idea of remote work or bringing people back to the office because they want more creativity. I would argue that remote versus not remote work, their culture of creativity or connection matters less about where the people are. It's more about their culture. And I think whether people are in the office, a building, or around the world, you can build culture and communication in many different ways, many different tools. And I think from HR perspective, I really think that the idea right now is people are going to crave a more authentic experience with HR, a more connected experience, a more being able to connect with people in different ways. Um, and communicate. I mean, you think about traditional HR type communication, right? You get your compensation, your total reward statement, or you get your benefit statement. How much of that statement is legalese and warning notices and disclaimers and everything like that? We tend not to communicate in a way that's really about the human. It's about protection and organization. And I think as we get into these AI tools and we get into this communication tools, being able to connect with people and drive culture is going to be so much more important. And how you kind of rebrand that to the new work environment, I think it's going to be so important. I think more and more people are finding different ways to communicate and to connect with people. In many ways, it's a very exciting time. Um, Dave, I will say this. Going back to a time without email sounds wonderful. So oh my
It's
goodness.
well, and if you think about at least for me, as people think about this, remote work and asynchronous work, and for many of us, I think the idea of being able to log on from home,
Yeah,
right? And this was, even before cell phones, but when there was you had a dial-up modem, but you could still access um, your email, and that might enable you to go home, see your family, have dinner with someone, and then, do work later at night. And in many ways, that was at the time liberating for people,
yeah,
as it gave some control. Now there's a little bit of a pushback from some people who feel that they need to disconnect, and and some of that is individual, some of that is by circumstance, but I do think it's that type of thing where technology is a tool, and technology can be used, and it can make us more efficient, but it can be in some ways abused.
yeah.
Um, and it cannot be helpful. So I think we'll continue to see all of that going on as well.
And I really agree with that. And I think part of you know as a field and as someone who has experience, seeing changes, working through leaders through many different changes, that experience is at the end of the day, it boils down to whatever the change is. Mergers, shrinking companies, whether it was COVID or other political things, now AI and the work environment changing. The foundational of good, solid human resource and leadership, of communicating to people, being able to explain to people what's going on, delivering that message of here's how it's impacting you, and here's what it means for you, and helping guide people make those decisions. that's a consistent theme that's needed to be there. Wherever that change is going to be. Um, whether it's, hey, we're not using interoffice mail anymore, we're going to use email, or whether it's going to be we're growing at 100% clip, or we're losing half our workforce this year. That human connection, that people, and I think more and more with AI, and I was mentioned before, was on a wonderful presentation for AI this morning, and in an hour presentation, the individual was able to do a research paper, do a presentation, create a video avatar, and develop a theme song and do that presentation in an hour, which probably would have taken, five or six different departments, marketing departments, weeks to do 10 years ago. You could do it in an hour. But at the end of the day, you need a human to still do that, right? And I think that's where the experience and people who right now are finding themselves in transition, how you leverage that experience, right? You bring years of experience as someone who's gone through these changes, worked through a consultant role, big organization. Now you're doing consultant work for organizations. So, what's those unique skill sets you're bringing to organization? Because let's be transparent. You can go on ChatGPT and get the HR policy if you want, but you don't have the right experience there to know what to ask it. So, talk about leveraging and experience this new work environment and how you bring value.
Happy to. I think there's a one thing before I get into that, I just want to mention, that we use an expression often, WIIFM, right? What's in it for me?
Yep.
And whenever I'm thinking about a change initiative, really, you know, what is the WIIFM for the audience, right? What is in it for the audience? So I think that's very important. Um, as I if we think through a lot of the ways to add value, I have to say, I think, one of the things that many of us in HR have not done as well as we could is quantify the value of HR, quantify the value, the way that we benefit organizations. And, obviously, we can talk about reducing turnover and reducing unwanted attrition in an organization. And most of us do. And we now have metrics and we can report on that. But what we haven't done a great job of in many cases is starting to think about what are the dollars and cents associated with that, right? And that, what does that mean if we have reduced unwanted attrition by 10%? How much money are we saving in uh, lost productivity when someone's not doing their work? How much are we saving with lost productivity when a new person is trying to get up to speed? Lost productivity when a manager is going through interviews, interviewing candidates, if we have to pay a fee to a recruiting agency. And so those are all quantifiable or at least estimatable things that we haven't done a great job of putting in place. And so when we talk about, I think we often recognize that intuitively. And so when we talk about the value of culture and how we can help support the culture of an organization, it seems very logical and intuitive to many of us in HR.
Yeah.
Um, what we haven't done is put ourselves in the seat of the CEO or the finance person to say, or the marketing person to say, well, here's why we're going to get money that last year went to marketing because we're investing in this HR initiative that will deliver these dollars. Um,
For all you marketing people, you could address your angry emails to David on my phone. But in all seriousness, like one of the crowning achievements that I had in my last organization I worked with is I got the CFO to agree on a tangible cost for turnover that we could use in our factors. And it wasn't an easy process. It was every variable you could think of, because you use that idea of like, it's 30% of the job, but those general terms. But when he actually could like, we could actually sit down, we worked on this for about a week together, me and him. When he actually could tie it to a tangible cost, I had the best ally for turnover. He was number one about driving turnover down. And so when I went to him and said, "Hey, look, I need more bagels for orientation, or I need, a leadership training program, and here's the return on that investment," man, because I had that base number, I talked that language. It was such an easier discussion, and I think it goes back to that WIIFM, which I think I'm going to plagiarize from you. It's wonderful. I love that term. Um, you have to speak to that at all levels, not only the team members, but the leaders, all the key stakeholders. And that's really important. You have to be able to speak multiple languages. And what a great point, Dave. I mean, it really is really a great point there. So, you're doing some things now as a consultant, kind of coming in and you bring these years of experience to people. What are some of the projects you find are most in need in most organizations for your level of expertise? Where do you bring the most value these days?
So most of the work that I've been doing recently is still focused on M&A. And so I think, in that space, um, the due diligence process is, one area where, uh, you know, many of us who've been doing M&A for a long time say, if you've seen one deal, you've seen one deal, since they each one is different in its own way. But um, the more experience you have in the space, the more likely you are to be able to anticipate trends, to have a sense of where in particular you might want to look, and that can help accelerate your process. It also is helpful, to start to understand some of the dynamics that you might see, the interpersonal dynamics in the course of a transaction, and how, you might be able to position things or approach things in a way that, um, makes for example, the negotiation process with leaders easier, or ultimately the onboarding of leaders, or just setting expectations. So I think having that experience, having lived through the history of it, is helpful, and particularly when you're dealing with business leaders who may not have seen as many transactions. They may be very expert in other areas, but this may be their first M&A transaction, or one of their first. And so having a guide who has been there before can be very helpful in that experience. Um,
I mean,
and,
what a great
I
point.
have, go ahead.
I say what a great point, because I think you want to slow down progress on a merger, mess up someone's payroll for the first time, or mess up the PTO conversion for everyone, and everyone suddenly gets less PTO hours, or their pension plan doesn't come over correctly, or the policy. I mean, these are things no one really thinks about. When they go off track, no one calls payroll and says, "Hey, thank you, my check's right this week," right? But when it's wrong, you want to derail a workforce. There you go. And those are those ideas when you work it from an HR perspective of understanding where, I think about like that harbor master comes on the boats and puts a boat to into bay. They jump on the boat, they know the bay, they know the
Hmm.
sandbars and everything like that. That's what you're hiring when you bring someone with your level of experience. These typical, you know, sandbars, if you will. I'll use that metaphor for a little bit. These typical, bumps that you can go on with these mergers that can really derail the whole project. And, to avoid them is so key to success. What a wonderful point you're making there.
So, yeah, and I think that's, the benefit of experience can, to show it in that way, I think is important. The other time, sometimes I also see with organizations that I look at it in two ways. One is um, like capability. That's sort of that experience. Have you seen this before? Have you done there? But another is just capacity. Sometimes an organization is running flat out with their day-to-day activity and just doesn't have the bandwidth to take on some of the additional work that's required. And so as a consultant, I can step in also and just be that extra pair of hands and help deliver uh, that work that needs to get done and allow the organization to continue to focus on their day to day.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I have the opportunity to do both, where I can um, deliver the day, help the organization execute, and then hopefully develop some of those skills and experiences in the existing team. And maybe next time they won't need me as much, which will be show that they've learned and developed and are progressing in their careers as well.
So important. What great advice and what the skill you bring there. Right. Someone wants to get in contact with you. Is interested in talking more, having you, go from there. How would they get in contact with you, Dave?
So I am my email is david.lawlor at myhrdealteam.com. That is my consulting business, and or they can reach me on LinkedIn. My profile's on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me and mention that you saw Espresso with Matt
Yeah,
and
discount, right?
that you'd be interested in connecting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would suggest everyone reach out to Dave. A wonderful connection, especially in this space. And a wonderful person to talk to. Now we're going to get to everyone's favorite time of the day, our espresso round of questions here. So here we go. We're going to jump right into this. So, what is the best piece of advice you ever got over a cup of coffee? Would we like to share that?
So I would have to say it was probably to take your work seriously, but not yourself.
Wow, very cool. That's some good advice. Absolutely. Um, if you go back and talk to a younger Dave over a cup of coffee, give him some advice. What advice do you give him?
Um, I think I would recommend to take more risks. I think personally, professionally, being a little less risk averse. Um, you know, not sure it would have worked out better, but it's worked out pretty well as it is. But I think I would have taken a few more risks.
They do say regret's not so much what you did, but what you didn't do. So really is some great advice there, and I think that's kind of what we're doing today. I mean, we're doing things different now, and trying new things and building our own business. I think there's some really cool opportunities there when you take some risks. So I really appreciate that advice. You got a cup of coffee with leaders out there to give them advice about how to run their organization. What advice are you giving them right now?
So, um, I think one of the things that sometimes leaders get caught up in, I describe it as just letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think, particularly in this environment, oftentimes, um, decisions need to be made with less than perfect information. And um, so people need to sometimes understand um, you know, what's an acceptable level, what's a good level, and where do we need to make a decision or execute something um, that's still high quality, meets the needs of the organization, but it may not be uh, the perfection that we would otherwise aspire to.
What great advice. And so many times when you look at bad decisions, a lot of times no decision is worse. Just staying still and not getting that communication. We talked about it earlier. Not communicating, going into a vacuum when you kind of have this idea that change is happening, and there's no communication coming out because the leadership can't come up with a decision, people start filling in those blanks pretty quickly, and they go to a pretty extreme. So that's such great advice is like make the best advice, make the best change and challenge and choice you can with the information you have at hand, and know you can always readjust down the road. Final espresso round question here. Have a cup of coffee anywhere, anytime, any place with anyone. Who you having that cup of coffee with, Dave?
So, I thought about this question, and I have to say, I think I would like to go back and speak with my grandparents. Um, they each had some very cool stories, very cool life experiences, and uh, getting a chance at this stage in my life to um, ask them questions, to hear more about that, about what they saw, I think would be great. So that's and I'm guessing there would be 5 cups of black coffee sitting around the table.
Absolutely. I don't know if they're drinking lattes, but I will say this that we don't do a great job really learning from different generations in this country and asking those questions. And it's so important because we're going through a big change right now, but there's been so many changes that happen all the time. And people get through it, people go okay. And I think that's reassuring if you think about that and you study from history. Well, this was a wonderful conversation and so much valuable information. I really want to thank you for joining. I really value our connection. I learned so much from you in talking with you and your style and what you bring to the discussion. I really do appreciate you joining this conversation.
I enjoyed it, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Take a look at his webpage. There's information there, guys. Make sure you connect with him on LinkedIn. And guys, until we have next cup, thank you so much. Have a great day.